We spend a lot of our lives online. There's lots of benefits to that. One of the potentially more frustrating things is being bombarded with advertisements. There's pros to that, finding out about brands that you didn't know about. Sometimes something comes up that you're genuinely interested in and you don't just skip. What's become a fascination of mine over the last few years is why this Facebook, Instagram ad spend approach really doesn't seem to work in specialty coffee. And I think the fact it doesn't work tells you quite a lot about how customers think about and approach buying specialty coffee. Now, a habit of mine that I've found to be very useful over the years, if anything that I'm new to and I'm learning about, I will try and study it, and I will look for different theories and different approaches. And then when I think I understand it, I will go and present my understanding to different people in that field who are experts, who know what they're talking about, bounce it back off and see if my understanding makes sense or not. Now, for quite a long time, I've been skeptical of ad spend in coffee. And so I started to share this skepticism. It's quite an evangelical space. People really believe that ad spend works for every business in every circumstance. Well, we should probably start by outlining what do I mean by ad spend. Well, what I'm referring to here is this sort of relatively modern phenomena in advertising, which is really pay-per-click advertising. Now, for a long, long time, hundreds of years, advertising was much softer, whether it was billboards, then the advent of television, and you sort of put something out there in front of a lot of people, and some were interested, some weren't, and then there was a lot of word of mouth. Generally, the brands with lots of money could put their brand in lots of places and get higher exposure. And then the internet came along, and the internet changed advertising for different reasons, but mainly because you could create specific cohorts and only advertise to those cohorts. By cohort, I mean a group of people that you think are more likely to be interested in your product. And you're not doing that, sometimes you're doing that based on, a demographic or a background, but sometimes you're just doing it on hard data. These people click on coffee websites all the time. They are interested in coffee. Obviously, there's a data sharing piece here, and a lot of this advertising relies on people's online behavior being used by ad companies. Anyway, what it means is you say, the big companies who are big enough and get in front of enough people and have collected enough data say, look, if you spend money with us, we can let you advertise directly to the customer that's likely to be interested in your product. So in coffee's case, that would be, this type of customer is likely to be interested in your coffee beans or your coffee pods or whatever you do, and you advertise it then. Now, generally, this works in an attribution model. So this is you basically put cookies on customers, and it follows them around the internet, really. And so, so you saw an ad on Facebook, and then you came over here and you spent money on the coffee website. Therefore, Facebook is saying, well, you got that customer because of the advert over there. There's a whole problem with attribution, which is, as a small coffee company, all you need to do is sign up with a few of them, and they'll all argue that the sale was theirs. But the reality is, you've probably already got customers that you were already going to sell to, that naturally, because they're your customer, your advertising cohort appeals to them because they're into coffee, but they already buy from you. So then Facebook or Google or other platforms will say, you got that sale because of us. The only way to prove one of these pay-per-click ad spend models is to do it at scale. And what that means is spend enough money to get in front of enough people that they're definitely not your customer. So you can't be just paying for customers you already had anymore. You are now advertising to so many different people or eyeballs that that's now a real example of whether you're really converting new people to come and buy your coffee. Right? I haven't spoken to anyone who's actually behind an ad spend strategy in the UK market who can show me that they have made this work sustainably. Now there's some people who go, oh, you should talk to, or you should, but they're just assuming, a lot of the time people are just assuming that a X company is spending money on ads and it's working, right? But the ones you speak to who are really in it all seem to say the same thing. Now I'm talking about, agencies, but also coffee companies that are specializing in online strategy and have 20, 30 people marketing teams, huge budgets, and they can't get it to work. Now, what do I mean by not getting it to work? Well, of course, put your products in front of enough people, you'll sell some coffee, right? When we say can't work, we mean it doesn't add up in terms of ROI. Now, ROI means return on investment. So how much money did you have to spend to advertise to sell one bag of coffee, right? People can calculate ROI in different ways. You can say, well, it was everything we had to do. It was our internal marketing team, it was the artwork we produced, the staff, everyone. Most of the time though, people's ROI is just ad spend, which is actually a problem with it because you can't create and manage ads without staff or agencies that you're also paying. Right? And so return on investment, ideally you want to spend a small amount on putting the ad in front of customers via Google and Facebook and Instagram, and that it's almost like catching fish, and you want one to bite without spending too much money. Now that specific number, the amount of money you have to spend to win a customer or get someone to come and purchase something from you, is called CAC, or cost of acquisition. This is how much money do you have to spend to get a customer to buy something. Now, obviously, this is directly related to what's called the ticket price, which is you spend X amount of money to get them to buy something, but then obviously what they buy is important. Because if you spend loads of money and they buy something cheap, not so good, is it? If you spend loads of money but they buy something really expensive, still works. Coffee is not a high ticket value item. Now, even with the rare Geshers and Sudan Rumeis, or the coffee itself is not a high ticket value item. Some of the equipment is, like an espresso machine or a grinder, right? But generally, coffee has a relatively low ticket price. And unfortunately, which is another obsession of mine at the moment, is I don't think specialty coffee in particular, and independent coffee roasteries, build in anywhere near enough gross margin for what they're doing. So they are doing everything by hand pretty much. Hand batches, loads of like QC, roast development, hand packing, all this stuff costs way more, but the margins are pretty similar to larger commercial companies who automate everything. But that's a different point. So the worst scenario you have with ad spend is a high cost of acquisition to a low or moderate ticket price at a low or moderate GP, gross profit, which is basically coffee. But the interesting bit here is how high the cost of acquisition is. Obviously, people push back immediately and they say, oh, well, if you take 3 brands and one does a better job, it's got a stronger brand that resonates more. You go onto its website converts better, as in the website's easier to use, people aren't confused by it, they buy quickly. Of course, all of those other things, brand, product, website, UX, they will all lower the cost of acquisition. Because if you have to spend hundreds of pounds to chuck people to the website, how good that website is at converting people directly impacts that cost of acquisition, right? But what's interesting for me is the statistics here. So I'm very open-minded to ad spend, and I've been interested in it for a while. Specialty coffee traditionally has been a very B2B space, so selling coffee to cafes, restaurants, offices, and this e-commerce space, COVID has just exploded this space. But before that, it was, there was one or two companies really focusing on it, but it was a small percentage of their sales. And I'm very open-minded to the idea that, and just to be clear, I think an e-commerce approach in coffee is very valuable, but that's different to ad spend. Although it appears, based on the emails that I get every week, that it appears that that's the only way people think you can market now, is just ad spend. But it's also treated like a tap on, tap off, spend more money on ad spend, sell more coffee. It's just, but this cost of acquisition, I've spoken to large coffee companies, small coffee companies, agencies, independent experts. I can't find anyone in the UK market who has been able to realistically, at any scale, get it below £30, right? Bear in mind, a bag of specialty coffee is probably £10. A good cart value, and by cart value we mean people buy a couple of bags, is maybe, it's typically £20, and above that's high. So you've already lost a lot of money, right? And then everyone goes, oh no, but sure. But what about subscribers? Now the theory here is pretty sound. It's this idea that, okay, you spent £30 and you only sold someone copy for £10, right? And you made £5 gross profit on it after postage, and then you haven't even counted all your staff and your overheads or whatever. But if you can get that customer to be a subscriber, then after 6, 7, 8, 9 months, it was worth it, is the basic theory, right? A couple of the companies that have really pushed this have said that they just can't do it. Like, you just can't get people to stay long enough to make that work. Coffee is notoriously quite an unloyal place. Like in terms of brands, I've learned this through some of the people I've worked with, and some of the insights I've received from market research, how people buy coffee. It's very, very interesting is that, it's an explorative space. People try and chop and change. They might have some people they go back to, and you have your core audience, but it's people want to play around and buy different coffee. I guess that's a bit like wine, Apparently in the UK supermarket, that's where some people, on average, spend the longest in any aisle in the supermarket. It doesn't matter how many times they go down there, they're one of two things: either not sure, but also just looking to try something different each time. That's interesting to me. I'm surprised it's not higher in wine. So is this all doom and gloom? Is this a bad thing? Well, just because specialty coffee doesn't match the online ad spend dream of, higher, I get these emails every week, Max, you can 10x your revenue. One of my problems is I write back to every single one, because I'm genuinely interested to see if one of them can come and prove me wrong. Some of them make me laugh because they go, oh, if your ticket price is only 20, 30 quid, oh, no way. Maybe you can bundle and get to 100. I'm like, okay, thanks, but no thanks. But I don't think this is a bad thing. I think, a lot of the specialty roaches that I spoke to in COVID all had 200, 300, 400% online growth. So this channel was great for them, but they weren't getting any of that from ad spend. So where was it coming from? Well, it's coming from the most ancient form of marketing, word of mouth. I think, based on the evidence, specialty coffee is an extremely authentic, traditional marketing space. So you have organic brand growth based on integrity and word of mouth. And the reason I think this happens is I think it happens because of who the consumer type is for the growth of specialty coffee and what they think about choosing coffee. So let me explain this, right? specialty coffee's boomed. There's more people drinking specialty coffee than ever before. COVID hits. A lot of this growth that everybody saw online was from customers who were not brewing a lot of great coffee at home. They were going to their favorite cafe, right? And they were going to their favorite cafe and they really enjoyed the coffee and they were happy for the baristas and the people there to make it for them. COVID hits and you go, oh shit. I mean, all the cafes are closed. Like, I can't live without that quality of coffee anymore. How do I make it at home? Now, yeah, there'll be some YouTubing and there'll be some Googling. But the reality is that most of it is I need to phone or message the person in my friend or colleague or acquaintance circle who knows about coffee. Now that person may or may not know loads about coffee, but they know the most in that group, right? So they are the person you know who's into it, who has some sort of expertise or knowledge. And that's where all of the specialty coffee brands saw their growth. They literally saw it from people asking their coffee friends who they should buy coffee from. And they then recommended these brands. Now the brands that did well were the brands that had a reputation within the community, which means they've spent years building up a reputation based on what they do. This is like very traditional branding. Like we build our brand over a longer period of time. We build up recognition for the quality of what we do. We find our audience, our 1,000 true customers, or there's a saying that you only need 1,000 true advocates to make a brand. And so that's a really great thing, right? Like, those brands benefited in COVID because they built something that people recognized. They hadn't just gone and spent some money with the dude who sent them an email saying, I've done you a Loom video and I'm gonna, I've seen you're leaving loads of money on the table, and if you just let us do your ads, you're just gonna get 10x. Like, they've actually grown their brands because they do something that people recognize as good. Think about it. Someone who self-identifies as an expert, well, they've studied the whole market. They know who all the good brands are, and if they put a new brand up in front of them, they're going to go, well, why haven't I seen that brand before? They're not going to go, oh, amazing, buy. They're going to be like, I don't know, I haven't seen that before. And for the customers who are not as knowledgeable about the scene and the different brands, well, if you're that customer and I put an advert in front of you that says we're the best coffee, you're going to be thinking, well, of course you're going to say that. Like, every brand says that. And that is probably that is a different topic here from a branding point of view. There's not a great deal of differentiation in coffee branding, as in the messaging looks quite simple. So it's actually like how well your brand is regarded, or what people in coffee think of your product and what you do. That's where your sales come from, really. A lot of coffee brands, you wouldn't, if you weren't into coffee, you'd be like, oh, they say they're all similarly good. So you wouldn't trust that brand. It's very different to buying a piece of fashion or a chessboard. I recently found out that apparently in chess, which has helped with Queen's Gambit, the Netflix series, a chessboard or a chess piece of paraphernalia, your ad spend is only 6% of the ticket price. I mean, I said to James, who I work with at the Roche, I was like, we should sell chessboards, James. So I think authentic communication with your audience and building a relationship with your customers is inherently a more natural strategy in the space and a more successful way of communicating and getting your coffee brand out there. Never say never to ad spend, but it is very interesting that it appears out of all the spaces you could do ad spend in, coffee might actually be one of the hardest.